Every so often you meet a weapon that is not content on being strong, it has to be super strong. This is the Amprex. Hey guys, hello and welcome back. As always, my name is Leyzar and today we're gonna be diving deeper into this Mastery Rank 10 powerhouse. This is probably, at the current time at least, one of the most powerful weapons I have ever used. And I got a cheap build for you guys, something anybody can get into and it will prove highly efficient. But of course we also have an endgame setup with a Riven. As said, this weapon comes at a mastery lock out of 10, so I will be keeping my new player-friendly approach. So if you're a veteran of the game, please bear with me. And with that out of the way, let's jump into the Amprex. Amprex? Let's start off by checking out how the weapon handles without any sorts of mods equipped, and for that I'm gonna need a couple of guinea pigs. First of all, the Amprex channels a frontal electric beam. It's continuous as you see, and per damage tick it consumes 0.5 ammo, which will make it extremely ammo efficient. As you can see, the electric beam will chain to additional targets. The range of the initial beam by default is 18 fish. No, probably meters they mean, but it is 18, and the range of the chain is only 10 fish, and it will chain to 4 maximum additional targets. As you can see, you are getting an electric status effect on the target, and that is because the Amprex by default does do electric damage. You can also see there are some lightning chains spawning from the weapon all around me, and they will strike enemies, but that is only a visual effect again, so it won't actually deal any sorts of damage. That being said, let's jump into the stats and see exactly what we're dealing with. To be honest, I stayed away from this weapon for so long simply because it looks kinda, well, like it does. In any case, let's see what we got. First of all, my mod capacity is 60 out of 60, and if yours has only 30 out of 30, then jump into actions and plug in an Orochian Catalyst. This one can be found from alerts, invasion, or if you're lucky, from the daily sortie. If you do not have access to the sortie yet, just wait, trust me, you will. My weapon has been formatted a total of 8 times because I really need to get alive, but for the weapon build I'm recommending you guys, 5 format should prove sufficient. The accuracy of the Amprex is 12.5, however this is a beam weapon, so minus accuracy on it won't have that much of an effect. Critical chance is absolutely hilarious. Look at this, 32% crit chance. It is only second to the Synapse when it comes to continuous rifles or automatic rifles. Only the Synapse has a higher crit chance. Crit multiplier is quite nice as well as 22%, and the fire rate is 12.0. Now the magazine size is 100. Just keep in mind that per damage tick you are consuming 0.5 ammo. Noise alarming, reload is 2.6. Now the reload is a slight issue, but again it is so ammo efficient, the reload time shouldn't really bother you at all. Riven disposition 3 out of 5, and I think this one fits the Amprex quite nicely. Status chance is 22%, which will be more than enough for what builds we have planned out, and I would call the status chance actually pretty good. By default, as you saw, it deals electricity damage, and the actual amount isn't really all that high, but considering how many ticks we got, considering the critical chance and everything else, it is fine, more than fine, it's great. Now you should know something about the Amprex. It doesn't start off at 100% of its damage as soon as you pull the trigger. It will start off at 20% of its damage, and it will ramp up to 100% of its damage over the course of 0.6 seconds. After you stop firing, it will remain at 100% of its damage for 0.8 seconds, after which it will decay back to the initial 20% over the course of 2 seconds. I know it's a little bit confusing, but hopefully you understood that. So let's slap on some mods, and of course as always we're gonna start with raw damage, because why the hell not. Serration is mandatory, 165% damage, and this is a mod that should be present on all of your rifle builds. And I'm gonna call heavy caliber 100% mandatory on the Amprex. The accuracy loss is minimal, and to be honest, and just playing with the weapon day to day, I didn't see any real difference between the normal accuracy and the accuracy with heavy caliber. That is because this is again a beam weapon, and accuracy loss doesn't really affect them all that much. However, you can't overdo it with minus accuracy because you can get the beam to fire backwards if you go too heavily into minus accuracy, but you're gonna need a Riven for that. In any case, you're not in any real danger like that. Now that we have our damage, let's go for multi-shot. Throughout my testing, I did notice that the one stat that had the biggest impact on the Amprex was multi-shot. So we're gonna slap on split chamber with 90% multi-shot, and we're gonna also apply vigilante armaments for another 60% multi-shot. Now vigilante armaments is especially potent on rifles because there is a very small gap between the 90% you get from split chamber and the 60% from vigilante armaments. Also, that set bonus, 5% chance to enhance critical hits from primary weapons. The crit chance of the Amprex, like we said, is absolutely amazing, and you're gonna see plenty of crit ups from vigilante armaments. Normally, the set bonus for this specific mod should be only an afterthought, but in the case of the Amprex, it becomes extremely potent, so by all means, do take it into account. Now that we got our multi-shot and we were talking about crit, why don't we amplify that crit chance with point strike? If you guys have prime versions of any of the mods that I recommend, then by all means go right on and put your prime versions. Just keep in mind that it may require you to forma a bit more. No more than 8 though, so there's that to take into account. So now that we amped up our look at this, critical chance 80% just with the normal version of point strike. Absolutely hilarious. Now you can go further into crit chance if you so desire with Argon Scope. 135% crit chance while aiming for 9 seconds. This one, however, is a fairly expensive mod, and normally I kinda shy away from recommending it. It's good, but for the base build you don't really need it. Now that we got crit chance, let's slap on some crit damage with a Vital Sense, and this will add 120% crit damage. This is not the only option when it comes to crit damage. You also have Bladed Rounds. Now Bladed Rounds is a mod that I personally don't like because it's on kill effect. However, it is extremely potent. On kill effect, 120% crit damage while aiming for 9 seconds. So it basically offers the same amount as Vital Sense, but the only part is that it's on kill and it's while aiming. Here's a fun little fact. It is a giant debate between Argon Scope and Bladed Rounds, which are better, which provide more DPS. And here is the truth. When it comes to paper DPS, Bladed Rounds will always offer more than Argon Scope. It's math, you cannot beat it. But you're not playing on a piece of paper, are you? So when it comes to real gameplay scenarios, having that guaranteed crit chance is a whole lot more important than the crit damage from Bladed Rounds. So it's pretty simple on this one. If you want paper DPS, go for Bladed Rounds. If you want real gameplay DPS, you would go for Argon Scope. There's a bit of a discussion in the community, so I thought I'd point that one out. But in any case, we got our crit chance, we got our crit damage. What follows next is elemental damage. When adding elemental damage to the Amprex, we must keep in mind that it does have electricity by default, and electricity currently in Warframe is probably the most sought after elemental by default on Rivens, on weapons, on whatever, simply because electricity can be used to make radiation, so you can take on an Eidolon fight, radiation is recommended there, and it can also be used to create corrosive against Grineer, which currently are the hardest targets to kill. They're simply the toughest. In our case, we can't exactly shoot an Eidolon, so we're gonna go for corrosive and up against Grineer. To make corrosive, we're gonna need a little toxin with electricity. We already got that electricity on, so we can just go on further and just add the toxic. When it comes to adding elemental damage to the Amprex, of course you have the 90 mods and the 60/60 mods, and this has been the bane of my existence, testing this weapon, which are better and in what circumstances. In order to fully exemplify why the setup that I'm using is the best, I'm gonna have to go into an example a bit later. We're gonna go with Malignant Force. This will add a 60% status chance, and it will also add 60% toxin. Now suddenly I have my corrosive with a single mod. That is a huge deal because basically you're left with an open slot and you already have your elemental combo. Now I tested pretty much everything, Argon Scope, Bladed Rounds, more crit, more status, more everything. You can even do the following: Hunter Munitions. Yes, you do have that free mod slot and you can go for Hunter Munitions. It's definitely not a bad idea. We have a super high crit chance, and we are gonna get some nice slashes out of Hunter Munitions. That is an option, however, it is not the best option. Later, we're gonna highlight Hunter Munitions in a full bleed build. For now, for an elemental build, the best thing you can do is add even more corrosive with toxin or electricity, whatever you prefer. I'm gonna be adding the 90% mod, and I'm gonna explain a bit later why that is. Corrosive jumped up to 587, and this will be the base build I'm recommending to you guys. There is absolutely nothing expensive here, and this build, as you will see, can get the job done. Now let's clear up whatever targets were left from the previous test and re-simulate, and we're simply gonna go to town on these guys, just so you can see what this weapon is capable of without any prime mods, without any Rivens, without anything special, and it simply chunks through targets like there is no tomorrow. Look at that, absolutely bloody glorious. And this is an MR10 weapon, which is super cheap to build and super effective. Now, before we change the build and go for something different, I want to talk about the damage of the beam. Normally, if you go for headshot damage, it will not affect the damage of the arc. However, keep in mind that the damage of the arc will get halved the more times it jumps. It jumps once, half the initial damage. Jumps another time, half of that and half of that. So each time it jumps, the damage will be reduced by 50%. So keep that one in mind. And no, it doesn't get affected by the initial headshot you would theoretically do on your target. Now I owe you guys a bit of an explanation why the 90 mod and the 60-60 mod. Now I'm gonna do a test just so I can exemplify. We're gonna pick up high voltage for electricity instead of Stormbringer. High voltage currently is no longer very expensive on PC because BattleKit here just brought it. If you guys don't have this one, you really should, because you will need it for a lot of rifle builds, a lot of primary weapon builds, and you should definitely have at least one copy in your arsenal. Now my status chance is gonna increase to 48%, and in order to exemplify exactly what I mean, we're gonna be going for the exact same test with body shots. Of course, we're gonna be doing a bit less damage because, well, no more headshot multiplier, but that is not the point. So I'm channeling on, they're still getting pretty much wrecked even without any headshots. Look at that, absolutely glorious. Now these two targets right here have their health bars red. That means that all the armor these Grenier had has been completely stripped away with a 48% status chance. If I go for direct damage on them, please look at my consistent amounts of damage. 1.5k crit, 2.9 crit, 2.9 crit, 2.9 crit. You get the general idea, right? So the yellow crits were about 2.9. If I hit a target such as this one that still has armor on, you will see that the damage amounts are greater. 5.1, 5.1, 5.2. Why the damage difference? Why am I doing more on targets which actually have armor? That is because of the corrosive. You get 75% extra damage bonus on ferrite armor, which these guys are equipped with, as long as they have that ferrite armor on. When you completely remove the armor from your targets, your damage bonus gets removed and you're actually gonna be doing less damage. Now I know this is a bit counterintuitive. Again, the whole point of removing armor was to deal more damage to them. Yes, unfortunately it works in the exact opposite. As long as you're building corrosive and going for armor stripping, if you overdo it, you're gonna end up killing your DPS. So it is important not to overdo it when it comes to the status chance. And in ordinary everyday gameplay, of course, you're not gonna consistently hit headshots. If you were to do this exact same test with the 60-60 mods and go for headshots, then the 60-60 mods would win over the 90 mods. If you were to repeat this test with the 90 mods over the 60-60 mods, then they would win in a body shot test against the 60-60 mods. I know that was a bit confusing. Hopefully it made a little bit of sense. So in body shots, 90 mods win. In headshots, 60-60 mods win. And I found that this was the ideal balance between the two. 190 mod, 160-60 mod. And again, going further into corrosive will prove more DPS than Argon, Scope, Bladed Runs, etc, etc. Now that that's out of the way, let's switch to a bleed build. And I kept my mandatory mods: Serration, Vital Sense, Point Strike, Split Chamber, and of course Heavy Caliber. Now Heavy Caliber, again, I call it mandatory. There is an argument to be had that because of the low base damage on the Amprex, Heavy Caliber doesn't do that much, but again, comparing to all the other options, including prime mods, it is still the highest DPS among the mandatory mods. So there is that to take into account. Now our bleed build will be, of course, through Hunter munitions. We don't have any slash on the weapon, and when you don't have any slash on the weapon, it doesn't really matter if you add more slash to it, it won't have anything, because basically they are percentage increases. So if I add Fang Fusillade with 120 slash, it's still no slash, so keep that one in mind. In any case, we slapped on Hunter munitions, 30% chance to apply slash status to an enemy on critical hit. We got an 80% critical chance, so we're gonna be applying plenty of slashes. Now it is a known well fact that when you're going for a slash build, what you want to do is build viral. Viral is an exceptional elemental combination because it will perform well in mostly any circumstances, especially against flesh and or cloned flesh when it has a 75% damage bonus. But the point here is that viral reduces the maximum health of a target by 50%, so in a way your slashes will be doing double damage. So why don't we go for viral with cryo rounds and infected clip. You see, we made viral and we still have the innate electricity of the weapon. Our viral is higher, much higher, so it will proc more often. Now we didn't go for the 60-60 mods here because we don't need 1000 status procs like you do for corrosive. When you go for corrosive, you want more applications of the status chance to further reduce that armor. However, in the case of viral, you just need one good one, in all honesty. So there's no point in not going for the 90 mods. We got our viral, we got our hunter munitions, we got our crit, we got everything we need to test the initial version of what is a hunter munitions crit bleed build. Now I'll be honest with you guys, the only reason I'm showing you this is because I'm sure some people want to see it. So let's see how effective it is. If I hit these guys to roughly 50% health, it will absolutely nuke them. And of course, the beam is arcing, and we are applying slashes to the other targets, but because the damage gets halved with each jump, we're not really applying big slashes to the target. So again, if you want to kill a target like this, hit it to it's about 50%. Of course, the viral application is there, and the slashes will be finishing off the target. Quite potent, isn't it? But it sure is not as pretty as the elemental build we showcased earlier. Now there is a way to further amplify this hunter munitions build to be a bit better. Not a lot better, just a bit better, but it includes expensive mods. I don't like including expensive mods in my builds, but there you go. For the presentation, Argon Scope, currently going between 200 and 250 plat over on the trade chat. This is an event mod. You're gonna have to wait until the event if you don't want to pay anything for it, because that is the only way it can be obtained. So our critical chance now will jump over 100%. That means that with every tick on the target, we have a chance, that 30% chance from hunter munitions. Now the final mod, when it comes to paper DPS again, will be bladed rounds. We got more crit damage, and that will amplify the crit values from hunter munitions. The crit values got the slash values from hunter munitions. However, in my testing and as a recommendation to you guys, I would go for more multi-shot through vigilante armaments. This in my testing has proved a bit more consistent. Yes, it is true that bladed rounds on paper is the biggest DPS, but simply this combination worked better. So we're gonna go with Argon Scope and vigilante armaments instead of viral and see what kind of a difference do we get. Simulate the same targets. We still have that electricity, so it is worth keeping in mind. And we got the extra crit chance. And now because we have vigilante armament, you're gonna see some crit ups as well. And we are doing a lot of shots on the target, so there is that. Look at that. Absolutely beautiful. It does crit more because of Argon Scope. There is no viral on the target, but it is bleeding a whole lot more consistently, and to be honest, a bit faster as well. If you really must have a bleed build on this weapon, which I personally don't recommend, then this should be the most potent one. I still recommend the elemental build, though I think that one, I know that one proves the better DPS. Now, with that out of the way, why don't we switch to something with a bit more humph, a Riven setup. Now, as you can see, the Riven setup I have here still has vigilante armaments. Again, I think that for the Amprex, this mod works especially good. And we have this awesome Riven, a loner from a friend. Critical chance, critical damage, and minus damage to corpus. Absolutely bloody brilliant. Currently, the Amprex Rivens are quite pricey, and getting one such as this will cost you, well, an arm and a leg. I don't necessarily recommend the Riven for the Amprex because, as you saw earlier, it is an extremely competitive weapon even without a Riven. But let's showcase and see what kind of difference do we get. We're gonna kill off whatever was left and simulate. Of course, with this kind of a Riven, we're gonna be tearing through these guys with no problem at all. Look at that. More crit, higher crits. I'm getting crit ups from vigilante armaments. Again, I'm doing a lot of shots on these targets. I really want to keep vigilante armaments because it proves extremely efficient. Look at that. That is a huge difference from an only disposition free Riven, but it is rolled quite nicely. Now, with that out of the way, why don't we switch to something with a lot more power? That is extremely powerful as it is, but we will not stop there. We're gonna pick up Lady Mirage, and she has Rifle Amp. Now this one can be obtained from the trade chat. It's around 10 plat, something like that. It's not really required for the Amprex, but it will offer 27% extra rifle damage. As for Arcane, we got a selection of 2. Arcane Rage, first of all, on headshot, 10% chance for plus 120% damage to rifles for 16 seconds, plus the usual plus 1 Arcane Revive. This one drops from the 3rd Eidolon down on Cetus and is definitely worth farming. As for our second option, Arcane Acceleration. Arcane Acceleration on critical hit will offer you a 20% chance for 60% fire rate rifles for 6 seconds. Like we talked earlier, the Amprex is extremely ammo efficient, so a very solid way of getting your DPS higher with the Amprex is to put on some fire rate. You can even do that with mods. From my point of view, it's not worth it. Arcane Acceleration will prove more than sufficient. And of course, we're going to be spawning in the exact same targets once again. Activate her clones and her third ability for damage increase, and you will see now that with Warframe buffs, this thing is a monster. I mean, what happened to them? They just simply get deleted. Make no mistake, currently the Amprex, okay, from my point of view, is completely overpowered. You can even do things like that to level 200, 300 enemies. Where will you find 200, 300 level enemies? Well, you gotta stay a couple of hours in a defense or a survival, but they do exist, so there is that to take into account. The Amprex currently is probably one of the most powerful primary weapons in the game, and I highly recommend it. It's only MR10, so basically anybody can get into it. The base build is not expensive at all. Definitely, it's very easy to obtain all of those mods and or buy them for a couple of plat. And that's gonna do it for this build guide. Hopefully now you know everything you need to about the Amprex and how to build it. As always, my name has been Leyzar. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, favorite, share, and subscribe if you enjoy the content. And I'll see you again next time. Bye bye everybody. Bye bye.